Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie Caruso, and I thought I would start this channel and introduce a little bit about myself. In terms of who am I to talk about politics, really no one. The truth is I'm a 33-year-old West Australian who has become a bit of a politics geek only because if you think about how the world has changed in the last 50 years or 30 years even, since I've been alive. Every facet of every single thing that we do, whether it's the way that we communicate, whether it is, our transport, the way that we travel, business in itself, think about startup innovation, everything has changed in such a considerable, crazy, crazy way. And yet one of the most important functions or structures in modern society is the way that we make decisions as a country, and that hasn't had anywhere near close to the amount of disruption as everything else, and yet it is such a critical part of our lives now and certainly into the future. And I think that has been largely what has inspired me or frustrated me or sort of gained my curiosity and attention, because how could we have such great transformation and improvement across so many different areas, and we're still using a system that is largely kind of a scaffolded, borrowed version of the Westminster system, that was really created for white landowners and white farmers here in Australia. And the issues that they contended with when they were building the foundation of what is essentially modern Australia, life was different. The challenges that they had were incredibly different, nowhere near as complex, and yet we haven't seemed to had the appetite perhaps to really look at the systemic changes that really need to happen. What isn't working? Why is it dysfunctional? And I think for a lot of young people, they look at who's representing them in Parliament. They look at, and I'm not going to be afraid to say it, pale, male, stale. And it's not them. They don't look like them. They haven't experienced, the inability to get into the housing market, the stresses of having, leaving university with a really high HECS debt. And don't get me wrong, Australia is an amazing place to live. I actually think it's the best country in the world. Obviously, I'm a little bit biased. But if there is ever going to be a country that is going to be able to innovate and elevate out of the current rut I feel that we are in, at least politically, I think it's going to be this country. I have a lot more faith, certainly in this country, than I do, sadly, for the UK, which is where my parents emigrated from the UK when there were those 10-pound pom individuals in the 70s. And I look at the US and certainly what's going on at the moment. It's terrifying, and I think Australia is very fortunate, but at the same point, we have systemic racism. We really haven't been able to have a strong, hard look and confront our history and the racism in that history, but also, gender inequality, how we've emerged. But I think considering how diversified our culture has become, how many immigrants are in, we've done incredibly well. So we've got a really good base to start from. We've got incredible resources available to us. We have the best opportunity for renewable energy. And we have really smart, intelligent, switched on people. And I think those ingredients deserve better than what we have right now. And I do feel that we're stuck in a political rut. Certainly the Liberal Party, who are the leading or the governing party at the moment, the coalition, they're not, if you sort of research Menzies and how that Liberal Party was originally founded and the ideals that it was founded upon, it really is such a departure from what it's become today. They call themselves the Liberal Party, but it's getting harder and harder for them to be able to honestly say that they're representing those same values. And I know there are a lot of people that are, perhaps they believe in liberal values as I do, and are increasingly concerned that they don't feel like they're represented. They don't feel like they have a vote anymore. It's too complex, and no one's really advocating for them, or it appears like it's this ping pong between the two majors and really no changes are made. And so, and I think the other issue, and it's a big issue, the two major parties both have blood on their hands. I know which one has more, but they both struggle with the ability to call each other out, because they know that there's likely, due to their history, something in that they've done that they can be called upon. And so what I think we really need is something fresh and clean, something that isn't going to, a party that isn't going to be hypocritical when they demand a new standard of conduct, a party that can aim to deliver a federal ICAC that's actually got the powers to prosecute against any political corruption, certainly in the federal level. And actually going to review, well, what in our political system that we have right now works really well. And I do feel that's a majority. I think that what we have right now is pretty good, and we should be pretty proud of it, honestly. But there are definitely some gaps that things like a federal ICAC, or reform in the way political donations are conducted and transparency around that, really looking at where are the transparency and accountability in the existing mechanism, and how can we not only fix it now, but ensure that it doesn't erode again in the future. Things like protecting the ABC or protecting a national broadcaster, and making sure that funding for that it's never politicized. It never has to deal with, the threat of, and you're going to have to excuse, I got my dogs arguing at the bottom. But, these are the things that I think most Australians just want, and they're frustrated. And then if you take the youth profile, so the last time I checked the numbers, it was roughly 7.3 million Australians aged between 20 and 40, right? So that's what I would call young Australians. They're a pretty influential group of individuals. And I mean, obviously I'm one of them, I'm being 33, but I do feel like there needs to be a greater representation or advocation for future Australia. I think a lot of Australians are really sick of this, making, popular promises for the next 4 years to get elected. And we know the process of actually delivering on promises is really tricky, especially if you don't have majority power. So it requires negotiation and waters down what possibly was a really good policy position. You have to sort of negotiate to get it passed, which means it's and that's good. That's democracy, right? It means that the different interest groups, let's hope in an ideal world, it would be, say the farmers or regional Australia, may have been disadvantaged to a really good policy that will improve, the life of many Australians. So those that are advocating on behalf of the farmers have a really important duty then to make sure that right provisions are made. And that's democracy, and it works in theory really well. But unfortunately, as I think a lot of you probably know, vested interest in the way that donations and money is influencing the party policy outcomes is incredibly detrimental to our future. We're really frustrated, and I certainly am frustrated. It's one of the most frustrating things for me, is that our system isn't engineered for optimum policy outcomes. So winning in the political sense is re-election, which makes it a popularity contest, as opposed to winning being the party that's able to best deliver and negotiate and communicate optimum policy. And that's not rewarded in the structure that we have now. Now, can that ever be fixed? Listen, I don't know, but I know that there are really incredibly smart Australians and people from around the world, but predominantly Australians, that I would really love them to be able to come up with, how can we explore maybe different mechanisms that we can introduce to the existing system that could mean that executing premium policy is success. And somehow, and that could even mean we have to extend the terms. Perhaps that's the right. But then I also argue then we need to have or introduce new mechanisms, let's call them handbrakes, where if the general population is really against something, so let's talk about same-sex marriage in that instance, I think it was pretty clear that the majority of Australians for quite a long period of time were really wanting and demanding same-sex marriage equality. I think it was a no-brainer for a lot of us. We were annoyed it took up so much political time and money. But there was no, because of the system and then dysfunction of it, it was really, really tricky. And I'm going to pick up my dog. This is going to be interesting. You can see how real things are. And so I think that in that instance, it highlighted that what the people wanted wasn't able to readily go through into legislation in the way that it really should. In that instance, if there is general, majority dissatisfaction or wanting a handbrake, I think there should be a mechanism for that. I don't think it should be for every little thing. We would never be functional. But to have some sort of mechanism, whether it's town hall meetings where I could press a button on a website from my local rep and ask for a town hall in a certain meeting, and that a number of us do that, and a town hall can happen, and they would be forced to represent our views. And that didn't happen. Even in the plebiscite, there were occasions where both sides of the fence, where the constituents had very clearly voted for or against, and the incumbent chose to ignore the constituents and vote according to what they thought. And that's not democracy. And I think that's one of the other examples that we have of its dysfunction. So to cut a long story short, I've obviously, as you might see, I've thought about a lot of things pretty deeply. And at one stage, I was working for a short period, My Vote, which was a direct democracy NGO. They weren't a political party, but the time there allowed me to really deep dive into a lot of ideas. And with direct democracy, I got to admit, I really came to the conclusion that it's not the model, that it's actually potentially quite dangerous. And over the next few videos, I hope to actually interview people broadly across the alternative options that we have now outside of the two majors, and perhaps the two majors themselves, and see what they've got to say for themselves if they're willing to talk to me. But I really want to advocate on behalf of young people, and Australians, anyone that's annoyed and frustrated by the system in the way that it is, wishes that they understood what the real alternatives are and what that would mean, but perhaps doesn't have the time to do all of that research themselves. So I'm going to put together a few videos of my process and my journey of trying to understand this exact problem myself. So one of the calls that I'm going to be doing today actually is with Dahi from Flux. And Flux is direct democracy on a blockchain. I'll go into detail in that call with him about what that's like. I have coming up a chat with the New Liberals, I believe with the Australian Progressives. So I'll probably keep adding to that list as they agree to chat with me and as we can get time to do it. But I hope that for anyone that is frustrated, for anyone that is seeking a party worth voting for in 2022, that I could perhaps assist in some way to help them find a better solution than what we have today. So thank you for listening. I apologize for my life and for a few interruptions, but perfection isn't what we need. We need honesty and authenticity, and life's messy. So thanks for tuning in. Send me in the comment section any questions that you have, any requests that you might have. I'm obviously on Twitter. I've created a Twitter page called at a party worth votes, and I'll put that probably somewhere in the summary section of this video if you want to follow it. And that's going to be me trying to document this process of, imagine if we actually stopped complaining and actually did something to rectify and ensure that we had a party worth voting for. My journey starts now. It started probably a few years ago, but I'm going to start documenting it from now, and hopefully it's of some use. So ciao for now, and I'll post the next video very soon.